Let's go over each step of the activity in great detail. As you might have noticed, the activity has two main components. The bulk of the activity is a construction task in which the student has to spell a word, and then finally at the end, briefly, the student says the individual sounds and reads the word. Let's take a few minutes to focus on just the first part, the spelling part. The lesson begins with a brief introduction to the task. You tell the student that you are spelling a word with letter tiles that are in mixed up order, and you tell the student the word and use it in a sentence. The best way to learn how to provide this information clearly and directly is to read the script verbatim. I encourage you to do that. The exact script for the introduction is, "Today I have a word puzzle for you. Here are the letters we need to write the word mop, but they are all mixed up. Your job is to help me put them in the right order. Please say mop." Your child says the word. You say, "Good job. You can clean the floor with a mop." That's the introduction. Following the introduction, you tell your child to give you the first sound in the word. Let's get it all set up so you can do that. We can do that together. So you've told the child in the introduction what the word is and what the task is. Excuse me. Now you're going to ask him for the very first sound in the word. And you do it this way. You say, "Please tell me, what's the first sound you hear in the word mop?" Again, what's the first sound you hear in the word mop? There are two important points for the teacher to understand about this step. The first is that you're asking the student for a sound, not a letter name. And the second is that when you say the word to be spelled, you're presenting it in a special way that provides tremendous support to the beginning student to figure out how to segment the word into its individual sounds. There are already two visual supports on the page, 3 letter tiles, 3 blank lines. And this gives tremendous information, of course, that you're going to be talking about something that has 3 parts. The next bit of support you provide is to say the word elongating the sounds like this. Mop. In ABeCeDarian, we call this very slow, elongated talk turtle talk to emphasize the slowness of the pronunciation. Again, here's how to say mop in turtle talk. Mop. What happens is that the sound and the ah sound are elongated or stretched out for about a second. You can't elongate the p sound without distorting it. It's something called a stop sound, and if you did try to elongate it, you would end up spitting on the person you're talking to, and it would sound something like and it wouldn't really sound very much like the sound as it's articulated in the word and in regular speech. So you can only elongate some sounds, like the and the technically called continuant sounds. There are detailed directions to help you identify these sounds in the teacher's manual. A table of sounds, for instance, can be found on page 45 of the teacher's manual with detailed instructions about turtle talk to reinforce the information that I'm providing here. So you're going to say the continuant sound and ah elongated for about a second. Mop. Another important point is that even though you're saying the word with some of the sounds stretched out or elongated for about a second, you're saying one syllable, one continuous bit of sound information without pauses in between the sounds. You are saying, for instance, mop, as opposed to 3 individual sounds, ah, p. You want to say the sounds all together but slowly because it's the student's task to pull the sounds apart. I'll have more to say about that in a little bit, but that's the student's work, is to hear a whole syllable and to break the word into the individual sounds, which for most beginning readers is not a particularly easy task, and that's what we're trying to help them be able to do. I have heard many teachers say, "What's the first sound of ah, p?" And that's wrong. That's the incorrect way to do it, because all the student has to do is echo There's no segmenting involved. It's an echoing task, not a segmenting task. So you want to make sure that you say the word continuously to make it a segmenting task. What's the first sound in mop? Continuous but elongated. The other bit of information that you're going to provide the student is to use your finger. You're going to use your finger to drag under the underlines as you say the word in the position that you are as you're saying the word, as if the word was stretched out over time and the 3 lines were representing the time. For instance, I will do this with watch the hand or the arrow go as I say the word mop in Turtle Talk. Mop. Again. Mop. After you say the word in Turtle Talk and run your finger under the lines, the student's task, as we've said, is to say the individual sound. So that's what they'll do. They'll say the first sound in mop is mm. Once the student has identified the correct sound, the teacher asks her to pull that sound down to the appropriate line. For example, in our word mop, the teacher would say, please pull the down to the first line, and the student would do that. Again, it's very important for the teacher to identify the letter tile by the sound and not a letter name, and for the student to do likewise. The steps would be repeated for the remaining sounds. What's the next sound you hear in, and then you say it in Turtle Talk, and drag your finger under the line. The next sound in mop. Then the student says the sound, ah. Do you know which one is ah? Yes. Let's drag it down. Here we go. And what's the last sound in mop? And the student says p and brings the letter down. It's very important to point out that at this last point, obviously there's only one letter left. Don't let the student just drag the letter down without saying the sound. The sound always has to be pronounced before the letter is moved. So what's the last sound? The student says p, and only when the student says p do you allow her to bring it down to the line. So let's go over what those steps are in the spelling part of the lesson. After the introduction of the word, you say, please tell me the first sound you hear in the word. And to support the student, you say the word in Turtle Talk while dragging your finger under the line. Then the student identifies the sound and says it before moving the letter to the appropriate line, and these steps are repeated for the remaining words. Let's look at those steps again for the word mop. What's the first sound you hear in mop? What's the next sound you hear in mop? Ah. What's the last sound you hear in mop? Let's quickly review those steps. After the word's presented, you tell the student to say the first, next, or last sound of the word. You support the student for segmenting the sounds by saying the word in Turtle Talk and while you drag your finger under the lines. After the student identifies the sound, then she moves the letter. The sound is identified before the letter. Now let's go over the very last step in presenting a word puzzle word. The word's been spelled now correctly, but we're not quite done yet. We're going to do a reading task, and it's called a tap and say. First I'll demonstrate, then I'll go through it more slowly, although it's much more straightforward and simpler to reproduce as the teacher than the earlier activities. Great job, we've spelled the word mop. Now I'm going to tap and say. My turn, listen, ah, p, mop. Your turn, and then the student mimics, ah, p, mop. So here are the basic steps. the teacher just touches the letter. If you're doing it with the interactive program, the letter expands like that nicely to show that that's the letter that's been selected. Teacher says the sound again. Sound, not the letter name, the sound. Ah, p. Notice now we are saying the sounds discreetly. We're doing the inverse of what we did before. The first task, the spelling task, involved hearing a whole syllable, mop, and breaking it into individual sounds. Now, we're putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. We're taking the individual discrete 3 sounds and combining them into a whole word or syllable, mop. Pause. Ah, pause. P, pause. And then after the individual sounds are pronounced, run your finger under the word quickly and say the whole word in regular speech, mop. So it goes like this, ah, p, mop. You model for the student, and then the student imitates. As you go through the lessons and the student understands the routines, you will no longer have to model, and the student can do the activity all by himself, which we refer to as, quite logically, tap and say. Ah, p, mop. Now let me go through the word puzzle for all 3 words in lesson 1. All the steps, the spelling and the reading together. Today I have a word puzzle for you. Here are the letters we need to write the word mop, but they are all mixed up. Your job is to help me put them in the right order. Please say mop. The child says mop. Good job. You can clean the floor with a mop. Please tell me the first sound you hear in mop. The child says, Do you know which is Yes, it's this one. Let's bring down to the first line. What's the next sound in mop? The child says, ah. Which one is ah? It's this one. Let's bring that down. What's the last sound you hear in mop? The child says, p. Please pull p down to the line. Great job. You've just spelled the word mop. Now we're going to tap and say. My turn. Listen. Ah, p, mop. Your turn. Says the child. Ah, p, mop. Great job. Hey, I think we can try another one. The next word puzzle word is sat. I sat down in a chair. Please say sat. The student repeats the word. What's the first sound you hear in sat? The student says s. Which one is s? This one? What's the next sound you hear in sat? The student says ah. Which letter? Oh, it's this one. And what's the last sound you hear in sat? The sound is t. Let's bring that down to the line. Great job again. We've just spelled the word sat. Let's tap and say. My turn. Listen. S, a, t, sat. Your turn. And then the student mimics. S, a, t, sat. Great job again. Let's do one more word. For our last word puzzle today, we have to spell the word tap. Tap your finger on your nose. Say tap. This child says tap. What's the first sound you hear in tap? And the child says t. Let's bring that down. What's the next sound you hear in tap? The child says ah. Please bring the ah down. And what's the last sound you hear in tap? And the child says p. Oh, you spelled your third word, tap. Fantastic. Time to tap and say. My turn. Listen. T, a, p. Tap. Your turn. And the child says t, a, p. Tap.